Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the BuzzStream Podcast. My name is Vince Nero. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Fractl co-founder Kelsey Libert. How you doing, Kelsey?
Hey, Vince. I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. It took us a while to do this. I think we both had random sick kiddos and all that comes with being an adult. So today, we are going to be speaking about kind of the state of AI and SEO and how, AI is kind of changing everything that we know and love, but maybe not really. So you've done a lot of speaking about this. You spoke at SMX about this in Boston. You're going to be speaking again in Brighton in September, Brighton SEO. So just a reminder for people to check that out. But yeah, we're going to be digging into this today. But before we do, I just want to remind everyone to like and subscribe. The more you share this stuff, the more it gets around, the more I can have great guests like Kelsey on the podcast. So, Kelsey, first thing I want to ask, I guess, is let's get our terminology straight when we talk about AI and SEO and this overlap. I know everybody's got their own acronyms these days. Are we calling this GEO? Are we calling this AIO? What do you got for me?
Yeah, it's one of the hottest industry debates this year, I feel, is kind of what this new terminology is going to be. And it was a big discussion at the conferences and even on client calls I've had this week, I was asking. And it seems like everyone is kind of coming around to the term of GEO or generative engine optimization. I think the reason is because it is slightly different than SEO, right? And so AI platforms don't rank content in the same way Google does. They synthesize it. So we really do need more accurate terminology to describe how we're going after this platform, right? So in LLMs, your brand visibility comes down to kind of how clearly you're signaling your entity expertise through the depth of your topic coverage, the breadth of your brand mentions right across all those amazing publishers that we're targeting when we're pitching in BuzzStream, and then also the resulting perceived authority from that digital footprint online, right? That proves that you have the contextual authority and trust that LLMs want to use to surface your brand when people have queries. As far as generative engine optimization goes, in the industry, I looked at some Google Trends data before this, and what was really cool is that back in January of this year, there's only 5,000 searches for that terminology. And as of June, there's now 74,000 searches for that. So it kind of shows you how this is going to be gaining traction in the industry. And also in that 6-month time frame, there is 1.5 million results for generative engine optimization. So really, it's kind of cool to see how quickly the SEO industry can coin and also rank a new term.
Yeah, I mean, and kind of despite you can call it whatever you want at this point. I think the important thing is kind of understanding how it works. And I thought you did a great job of kind of explaining that it does, synthesize results rather than kind of going out and gathering what is, regurgitating what is there, or showing you like a list of links. And I want to get to, I forget if this was in your deck or in your Search Engine Land article, but there's a stat in there about 77% of people still say they use Google search for their information. And to me, that's an interesting topic because we get into these things, I think, in the SEO world where it's like, okay, AI's here, SEO is dead. Everybody likes to talk about SEO being dead, but like 77% of people still saying they use Google search, and like the blue links, there was another stat, 49% still click the blue links. Like, that's still a lot of people interacting with kind of traditional AI, or sorry, traditional Google search, layout. So what's happening here? I mean, do you think those are just outdated? Is it that that's just going to change? I mean, do you expect that to go down? It is, SEO is not dead, right? But like, there are these metrics here that are kind of causing some confusion.
Yeah, what's really interesting, again, I don't know if it's just my experience in digital PR, why I love Google Trends so much, but it kind of can tell you what is up and coming in the industry or what is the collective fear or thought. And this is another one I've been looking at more recently because SEO is dead, right? It's kind of, to me, a very doomsday or clickbait headline. Like, yes, there's a massive shift going on in our industry right now, and AI will reign supreme within, in my opinion, the next 12 to 24 months. in the early adopters, early innovators, and then within the next 2 to 3 years max for the rest of the consumers. But at the end of the day, the whole idea of SEO is dead is just a headline to me. Because really, when you look at it, it's in June 2025, SEO drove over 22 million global searches, right? So, like, that doesn't seem like a dying strategy to me. On the flip side, SEO is dead only had 12,000 searches, right? So that seems like more of a niche industry thing that people are pushing versus some like mass crisis that we're about to go through. And ultimately, in my opinion, brand visibility, whether it's in AIOs or LLMs or Google, they kind of all focus on the same principles that SEOs, or at least the best SEOs, have focused on for at least over a decade now, right? Like building, like you've done really well with BuzzStream, valuable educational content, especially data driven or something unique that is new that, LLMs and Google can't replicate without you as an expert source. And then getting that syndicated everywhere, right? And getting those authoritative brand mentions. All of these signals kind of work both within Google, within ChatGPT, even on social, right? Create cool stuff, get it shared a lot of places, and people will find you and respect you and want to buy from you, type of thing.
Yeah, I love that. And kind of good transition, I think, into another question I wanted to ask, which I think, is most applicable to the SEOs and kind of like digital PR link builders. But what role do you feel links have in this new kind of GEO landscape?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of really cool studies coming out of both SEMrush and Ahrefs looking at this, and a lot of other agencies as well. I really love Louise Linehan, is it? Over at Ahrefs, she's done some big data projects, and recently in the last quarter, I believe she posted a study of over 75,000 brands where they found that brand web mentions show the strongest correlation with AI overviews. And what's important to differentiate here, right, is we all come from the world of brand mentions, but also the little blue link, right? All the clients always wanted the do follow link to be specific, right? And then over the years, we've steered them into, oh, look at these Google pages that talk about no follow links are still recognized too now in Google as an authority, and especially from authoritative publishers. So what this study shows, right, is that it's more about building your digital footprint on authoritative sites through brand mentions. Like, yes, links will always be great from authoritative sites, but now with LLMs, it's more about just building the footprint of the brand mention because all that gets woven into the training data. It comes up within RAG searches. So it's no longer necessarily about the link as much as it is just about getting that brand mention out there in a lot of different places to show that you are the authority in your niche.
Yeah, and there was something you mentioned earlier that reminded me that you kind of have always been a champion of a kind of using syndication kind of to your advantage. Not to, we didn't really talking about this topic, so not to put you on the spot about this, but do you feel that is that play still viable? Do syndicated links add to this? I mean, is that something that people should be focusing on when you're talking about getting brand mentions? Does AI care if it's, a syndicated piece of content that you're just getting your brand mentioned over and over from the same source?
Yeah. So I love syndication because it basically does my work for me, right? I think there's different types of syndication. So there's a co-citation syndication, right, where it's one news story that's just replicated across an entire network of sites. To me, yes, that is extremely valuable because these LLMs are digesting all of the information from all these sites that are part of their training data or through RAG, right? So the more mentions you get, the more you're perceived as an authority. It doesn't matter if it's on the same network of sites, it's just more mentions, building that footprint out. And also beyond co-citation links, I think what we've seen with Fractl's content is that when you can create really interesting, valuable content, you also get natural syndication in that if we place something with Vice or Business Insider or CNBC, other leaders within those niches look to them for breaking news and then will write custom stories as well. So to me, both are considered syndication, right, in my vocabulary and are equally valuable in that they build that kind of brand presence across a lot of different places.
Yeah, and I mean, I would expect that like the like second version of that where it's like more natural syndication probably is more impactful. I mean, one of the things that I remember reading is like once you get that syndicated piece, sometimes Google will kind of self-canonicalize the news site rather than, the syndicated site rather than like the original content as like the original source, which is kind of lame and weird. But like, I'm sure there's all kinds of stuff going on in the back of the algorithm that looks at that stuff. But yeah, to me, I wonder if those would have more impact. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel, right, like we all have a certain information we know versus what we might think. We do have an agent that looks at the whole Google leak corpus and you can query again. So that might be a good one for us to do later.
Mm,
But I do believe that the more unique content, right, in general, will always drive more value. But I think when it comes to LLMs, it's more about your breadth of coverage versus is it the same content? I don't know how much duplicative content is covered in LLMs. It's like a bad signal.
right.
So that'd be a good thing to research more as well.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking out loud, it's like they probably don't want that much duplicate, or it's probably not a bad thing, or they probably just like ignore it, right?
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
another person at SMX had a great question after my session focused on what about sponsored content too? And it seems like the early signs are showing that even sponsored content still gets incorporated into the training data. That's another interesting way to get your foot in the door if you're not as skilled at the digital PR work we all do, right?
Yeah, yeah, and well, I have a follow-up question to that, but I do think that's a good transition into kind of the digital PR side of things. So like, I know Fractl has always been, even back in my day of work when I worked at Siege Media, it was always like, Fractl is one of the only main or major competitors I feel like doing like a lot of the same stuff that we were doing at Siege. So I take it you're still doing digital PR. You kind of alluded to that. I'm curious kind of how, if at all, the strategy has changed since the advent of AI.
Yeah. So Fractal is for sure still doing digital PR. We've been doing this line of work for about 13 years now. And on Clutch, they rate like 30,000 agencies around the world under their content marketing category. And then their leaders matrix, we're in the number one spot. So I would say that we excel in that type of work where you can produce really newsworthy, high value content and use digital PR to do high touch outreach, right? To get these leading journalists in various verticals to cover your client and your research. So that's the bread and butter really of what we do. And then we're building custom agents and we do on-site content, the full suite of what it takes to build that footprint online. How we've evolved those strategies over time is we've always taken a very research-driven approach to how we do our processes at Fractal, right? Like we did surveys of leading publishers and journalists back in like 2012, 2013. We published on Harvard Business Review and how important that high touch, very targeted outreach is versus the mass blasting that everybody does, and how that can affect your brand over time. So we have 13 years of building a brand around we do trustworthy, newsworthy, authoritative research, which has really helped us stand out, I think, in a lot of these inboxes, especially as the market has become very saturated in the last few years. I think the biggest change, however, has been how do companies and agencies take their proven processes and build agentic workflows to kind of scale what they know works, right? So we have 13 years of pitches that have resulted in press and data into the types of campaigns that publishers want. And what we've done is kind of built workflows that help scale. You input a client landing page and it'll generate a personalized pitch for you that distills like the most interesting bullet points from the study and then has a customized closing and all the different signals we've learned over time. And that's the tip of the iceberg. I think right now we have close to 100 GPTs and custom agents through Fractal agents that are helping to scale everything from the research side of the work that we do, the ideation, the survey development, to the list building and whatnot. And ultimately, the goal is how do you then gain that time back to in digital PR, right? Investing more in building relationships with these leading journalists that are getting pitched, 100 to 1,000 times a day. Like you really need to put that time in to stand out. And that's what we're trying to gain back. And through that, uh, head of PR just did some research for us, looking at our analytics year over year over the last 5 years. And domain authority of our average placement went up from like 74 to 78. We're exceeding the placement volume. We're only halfway through the year. We're already close to what we would have gotten in a whole year. And our placement rate years ago when we first started, I think the average industry placement rate was about 4.5. It was a BuzzStream study back in the day. You should refresh that.
Yeah.
And nowadays, with so much, all the industry chatter is about the saturation of the industry and how, it's getting harder and harder, which I completely agree. And you have to kind of diversify yourself from the competition in that way. But our placement rate now hovers around 7.8%. So I would say by scaling what we know works with AI and freeing up that time for the more high level relationship building type of work or creative work, that's a huge benefit of AI right now.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating, and just kind of goes to show, if anybody's been following what I talk about on LinkedIn all the time nowadays too, is that I love that you mentioned that, Kelsey, like focusing in on like the highly relevant outreach because there is just so much crap out there that journalists have to wade through. So like not only finding the right people, but like building relationships, like you said. I'm curious, what does that look like nowadays? Has that changed, the building relationships with journalists piece?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we did early on in Fractl is when we had a publisher that we were building a relationship with, or basically they just opened the door to us, right? We would always be asking questions like, is there additional data that you want us to get for this study to make it more relevant to your specific angle that you want to go after? Even if it's an additional question, we can run a quick survey for that to add to this. Or are there other ideas you want after maybe a story goes live? Like, what's in your pipeline for the next 3 months? Like, what topics do you want to explore next? Like, is there ways that we can partner on that? And, we've got dozens of clients, so there's numerous topics we can go after. Also, over the years, we've interviewed specific journalists at leading publishers, and we pay them for their time. So I would bring our PR team into a room and pay this person, even just 30 minutes of their time to ask very pointed questions about, how does your review process go? What types of, do you want more surveys? Do you want more API type scrapes? Like, what type of data is most interesting to you? I think surveys are very prevalent in the industry now, right? So how do you kind of go beyond that? And really, to me, those are the ways that you build relationships. You kind of prop up their expertise and demonstrate, hey, like, I recognize that you are the best in your industry and I want to give you the best in my industry. So the more we can talk and learn from each other, the better I can deliver for you, versus just ending it as, oh, the story went live. Thanks, great. Like, I posted it on social, right? Like, for sure, do that too. Tag them. Different ways to build relationships and really just staying in touch and learning, how can I give you more data to make your stories better on the topics you want to do more of?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Going that kind of extra mile, I love the idea of like providing an extra question or something that, you might have to run another survey, but like so, on the agency side, I feel like people are very cost averse because the margins are so thin and like, but that to me is where things have to start changing. It's like, you know, link expectations, coverage expectations need to start shifting because it's so hard to cut through the noise. There's fewer journalists, all that stuff. But then also what is required, I think, or expected from the agency side or any PR side, um, like we are beholden to journalists and we should be kind of giving them, we've talked about providing value, but like when you really think about it, some of that stuff you said is like really providing value. Like that's that you have to go above and beyond.
You really do. And to me, it's even taking the time to personalize your intro or your subject line. Like, I've done this work since like 2006, right? And I've just seen the number of people coming into the industry and the spray and pray approach and like the burnout that journalists talk about. And every time I've ever taken the moment, whether I'm doing B2B outreach for sales or pitching a journalist, when I take the time to actually get to know the person on the other side of the inbox and personalize my subject line to something that's not even related to my pitch or my intro, like, oh, you have a dog and I have a dog, or you went to college here and I went to college here, it shows that you are a human on the other side, right? Especially because now more than ever, there's a lot of robots out there, right? And I wrote a
Hmm.
story on Harvard Business Review back in, I think, 2013 about the robot invasion, is what I called it, because the PR industry largely embraces the spray and pray, which I'm vehemently against, and I've seen fail time and time again. And so to me, the more you can slow down and demonstrate, especially now that you're a human and that you read the other person's archives and you truly understand what they're publishing and you're giving them exactly what they want, new research on topics they're interested in, and you took the time to get to know them as a person, that's the whole anonymity and identifiable other. I've seen other people that have previously worked under me talk about that on this podcast, because I love that stuff, right? Like, take the time to connect with somebody on a one-to-one basis and show you care. That's how you're going to stand out nowadays. You have to do it, otherwise you're going to blend in with everybody else that is scaling AI, and unfortunately flooding inboxes with crap.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've seen it in our own studies that we've talked about. And I don't want to, let's switch gears because there's a couple of things also that I think you mentioned in your deck. I want to kind of get back to a little bit more of the industry shift, because there was one thing talking about the things that people found frustrating with Google search. And the reason I bring this up is because I do think, a lot of this, once we understand kind of where things are shifting, you can actually kind of build better strategies, right? So, in your your research found that ads were really like the top frustrating thing that people found in Google search. Do you think ads are ever going to go away at this point?
I wish, but no way. And also, there's lots of information out there now that like OpenAI is probably also going to be rolling out ads within the next year, which, of course,
Yeah.
businesses
Yeah.
have to make money, especially when they're
I
that
mean,
expensive to run.
so what does that do to our strategies? I mean, is it just the same, more of the same? You just have to kind of compete with the noise?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, the frustration and the friction in Google is kind of alarming, just because I think consumers are pretty adamant at this point. Like in that study, and I have some of these charts up here. So, like 66% of people were frustrated with ads cluttering search results, right? 44, close to 45% were frustrated with inaccurate or misleading AI generated summaries. Uh, Close to 40% irrelevant results. So these are a lot of big things that back in the day, like with Google, if you got inaccurate information or irrelevant results, like Google probably wouldn't have taken off in the way that it did. So now that this is happening at the same time that these new AI platforms are emerging, it represents a huge threat, in my opinion, to Google because in addition to the inaccuracies and all the ads and the irrelevant results, now it's just like all the valuable information is getting pushed lower and lower and lower at a time where AI is coming in and just giving you the direct answer as soon, like immediately. Like I'm using it every day now, dozens of times a day versus Google. And so to me, it's like as a marketer, you need to already be evolving your strategies to, yes, I want to still hit Google, but if Google is going to keep burying and burying my organic results, how do I also appear in LLMs and how do I appear in Reddit or social? And diversifying your strategy to be more cross platform, I think is really key in the future. And really just feeding the LLMs information that you are incorporated in their summaries. So dominate everywhere is the goal.
Well, yeah, let's dig into that a little bit. I mean, when you're talking about getting mentions and kind of building your brand outside of just pitching journalists, right? Like that's one aspect of it is like creating great content and pitching it to journalists, getting mentioned in the press. But like, how should people be thinking about expanding outside of just that one channel?
Yeah, outside of just Google. SparkToro and Brandfish they have a great chart that kind of shows you where people believe they should invest their marketing dollars versus where all the different channels that consumers are really engaging in, right? And Google, of course, is a huge one. So are publishers and whatnot, but then all the social channels, your own email newsletters, uh, different like YouTubes or Reddit syndication. And to me, what this all comes down to as a brand is create really valuable content, very educational content for your niche, especially around like the FAQs that your target persona is maybe asking. Create really, just generally newsworthy, interesting information that may be a little bit tangentially related to what your brand specifically does, but can help drive that press acquisition and the general awareness and authority signals. And then take that best content and repurpose it for every one of those channels, right? If you look at that pie chart, it really has, I don't know, maybe like 20 or 30 different types of platforms you can syndicate your content to. And it's not about necessarily needing a different content strategy for each one of them versus creating a really robust content strategy and then repurposing it for all of those different channels. Because so many of us
Yeah.
fail at that, right? Like we have campaigns that have gotten like 1,000 different placements and leading publishers. But then if you don't do more than just publisher acquisition, that campaign lost so much reach that it could have had otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my follow-up is like, is that something that you push brands to do that you work with your clients is like, here is a social post version of this or, is that something that you have with the AI, the AI agents workflow?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge thing that me personally, I am advocating for heavily this year. And also that through our agents, we're trying to empower our clients and just other brands to do. So we have a social content creator agent where you input the client's landing page and it'll turn it into custom images and copy and hashtags for that specific page. So then, bam,
That's awesome.
post that on
Yeah.
social, right? And then we have a page where you take that same landing page, or maybe you take the exclusive and you put that into a Reddit agent, which will then look at the content. It'll identify the relevant target audiences that it would do well with. And then it finds all the relevant subreddits that those target audiences are on. And then it comes up with a custom headline based on what that audience engages with most. Like every subreddit has its own style, right? Of headline writing and the topics that it's talking about. So it'll have custom headlines for each one of them and things like that, right? take the content and help syndicate it with the click of a button. And that to me is huge. And you always still need a human in the loop, right? It'll give you a report of 100 different subreddits and different headlines. And, maybe it takes me 5 minutes to go through them now and pick out the best ones and then syndicate versus before sitting there and having to come up with what are all the subreddits, what are the headlines that might work here. So yeah, for sure. I think that's going to be huge, especially in the next 12 to 24 months as brands thinking more about that.
Yeah, I was just speaking with Ross Simmons and some of his colleagues from Foundation about Reddit. He spoke at SEO Week. Is it SEO Week? Yeah. About Reddit and repurposing. And that's something to me that just keeps coming up. I feel like is, because all these AI, the LLMs talk about using Reddit so much. But one of the kind of takeaways, I was curious your thoughts on this, is like, it's not necessarily that these LLMs are going to Reddit just to get information about a brand. They're really going to get like insights and kind of personal takes about a brand, right? So like there's still a lot, I feel like, in that strategy that is a mystery to me of like how to do it authentically without sounding like your brand. But yeah, curious what your thoughts are on some of the strategies there.
Yeah, I mean, you could have a whole agency probably that specializes in Reddit. It's not necessarily us. We're building agents to help kind of scale that analysis that you're talking about and understanding of it. I think the biggest opportunity that I've seen, and also just if you follow Lily Ray right on Blue Sky, huge about how Reddit just started dominating the SERPs in the last 6 to 12 months. And so that was an easy play for SEOs to be like, okay, if we already have great content, I think it's mostly about how do you find the relevant subreddits that won't perceive it as ad, right? They'll perceive it, especially when you have unique research or really valuable educational guide for that specific community, then I think you have better odds of having success on those platforms. Anytime you try to take something that's like the best business loans or something like and just blast that off of 30 different subreddits about business and whatnot, like that might be perceived more as ad copyright. And we face the same thing, I think, in content marketing and digital PR when clients want to be too on brand or too promotional. Those campaigns will always flop, right? So you always have to think about how am I truly adding value to this community, whether that community is a publisher's audience or Reddit or YouTube, and how am I providing something new for people to talk about versus something that's been regurgitated a dozen times on any one of these sites. So really focusing on community, I think, is the biggest thing and what resonates with them and understanding that.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to post to the SEO one. I feel like that's like the
Yeah.
most toxic of them all, and I've gotten banned and like so it sounds like it probably helps as an agency when you have clients across a bunch of different subreddits that maybe are not as they're searching for people to blast who are potentially, you know, gaming the system.
Yeah.
Okay, Kelsey, you talked about a few really interesting ways it sounds like these AI agents that you've built are kind of helping into the workflow. One of the things I think we didn't touch on, which is super important, and I find myself kind of like falling behind with this, is stuff is changing so quickly, right? For me, it's very hard to get a handle on where everything's going and how quickly it's moving. What would you say are kind of tentpole metrics that people need to really be focusing on to track their performance these days?
Yeah. Well, I don't think we need to touch on the tried and true SEO metrics, right? Of just generally kind of your top pages, right? Just maybe briefly. I'm always looking at Ahrefs or SEMrush about like what are my pages that are driving the most traffic to my site and kind of what are the gaps in that and versus my competitors. When you're looking at just general SEO, kind of where are my authoritative brand links coming from and where are my gaps in that versus my competitors too. I think when it comes to GEO, right, generative engines, then it's more about using very new tools that are hitting the market like every day, right? I think agents and agentic workflows are going to be the word of the year by the end of this year, if not early in 2026. But what we've designed and where we see the industry going is really agents that help you understand kind of how does your brand appear in LLM training data versus your competitors? Because if you're not in the training data, right, you're probably not going to be in the results. Of course, now many more of those searches rely on RAG. So you have those opportunities, especially when you are appearing in these high authority publishers that are often relied on for those types of searches. So really, what are your content gaps, both from an SEO perspective, but also an LLM perspective? And there's different agents you can use to decipher that. And so like, do you own sustainable packaging, or is that owned by your competitor? Like, what kind of queries or topics are you appearing in for ChatGPT versus Perplexity versus Claude? Because they all use different training, right? And different systems. So understanding that is really important too. Also exploring the different types of content that LLMs prefer for your specific vertical, right? So certain verticals, in the same way as Google has Eat, right? LLMs have their own preferences. So when are they sourcing more of expert quotes or raw data or listicles? What topics drive more of that kind of content type, and how does that relate back to what you're producing? And also, one of the best things to me right now is understanding which publishers are surfacing the most for certain queries, right? So Fractl did a study as part of my SMX talk that I'm going to release on Search Engine Land in July, looking at, I think it was like over 8,000 keywords across 25 verticals on both AIOs and LLMs, trying to look at what publishers appear most in each of these different search platforms. And what we found was there was not a significant overlap in the publishers that appear in Google versus like a ChatGPT or any of the other LLMs. And that's kind of illuminating and concerning, right, from a digital PR perspective, because you're like, oh, what is that sweet spot of publishers I can hit that will get me appearing at the top of Google and ChatGPT? And there's not a lot of them. There's like 1,000. I think there was like 7,000 domains that appeared just in AIOs, and maybe like 1,000 that had the overlap, and then the rest were just all exclusively in LLM. So I think really understanding, especially within your niche, which publishers are appearing the most for your queries, and then how can that be a foot in the door for you as a brand to get your brand on that site and be woven into those stories that are going to surface more, right? Because maybe your brand doesn't have the digital footprint yet or the authority to kind of be surfaced in LLMs, but the best way to get your foot in the door then is to get into those sites that already have that and are being surfaced and linked to.
So to kind of summarize, it sounds like it's at, basically doing your due diligence to understand where you're showing up for your main keywords, right? And it sounds like you can kind of do that manually, where you're just searching for similar terms and questions that maybe your customers might have. But then I love this idea of kind of reverse engineering, just kind of looking at where these LMs are sourcing the data from. And it sounds like it's really different. It's going to be different for each platform. So maybe again, it gets back to, I don't know. I don't think SparkToro quite has this yet, right? Where it's like these types of, they don't have like an AI technology version of their kind of audience breakdown yet, right?
Not yet.
Like people
We'll
who
get to
search
see.
for this generally do it on ChatGPT.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
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 What are
But yeah, that would be really interesting to kind of break that down.
Yeah, and I mean,
Go ahead. Sorry.
one thing I can tease too is that what we found is that the more niche publishers are the ones that are often surfacing in LLMs versus kind of the mainstream publishers that are appearing in Google. And I think the reason being is that, right, LLMs are looking for kind of who are the niche authorities of any given topic. And the way you do that not isn't necessarily the breadth of your coverage, it's the depth of your coverage. So when you think of like an Edmunds, right, or they're very narrow in the topics that they're focusing on and they cover them very deeply. And so what we're finding is oftentimes these LLMs are surfacing more of those niche sites. And it's funny to me because sometimes when people in PR talk about niche, like, it has to be very relevant to you, people perceive that as it has to be extremely on brand. And no, it doesn't need to be extremely on brand. It just needs to be, if you're producing an education site, maybe you want to get on Edweek and parents.com. Those are very niche relevant to me, and they're also mainstream authorities versus maybe a USA Today or a CNBC. Equal authority, especially in Google's eyes, that's going to help you appear higher in the SERPs, but these more other niche authorities are going to help you appear more in the LLMs is kind of one of the biggest things that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Kelsey, I don't want to take up too much of your time here. I really appreciate you even teasing some of this new study that I think will be out by the time this goes live. So keep an eye out for that. I'll share that in the show notes. But want to thank you so much, Kelsey, for your time here. Like I said, show notes. I'm definitely going to include the deck that you gave me from depending on when this goes live, whatever other studies you have in the pipe. And I'll also link to, Kelsey and the Fractl team did a lot of great studies with BuzzStream before my time, but they are all still on the site and some great stuff there. So highly recommend connecting with Kelsey on LinkedIn. She's active on Blue Sky, still going strong on Blue Sky, right?
Working on it, yeah. I'm back into it now that the conference is paused for a month or two.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, just a reminder, listeners, watchers, like, subscribe, share this stuff. If you have any questions about any of the stuff that Kelsey covered today, please leave it in the comments. You can hit me up, you can email me, but I will make sure Kelsey gets that and we'll get an answer back to you. So thanks again, Kelsey, so much. This has been great. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for having me.